June 15, 1944. The Bocage country near Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. Staff Sergeant, Artificer, William Billy Mercer, attached to the Light Aid Detachment of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, stands beside his Sherman V. He watches, grim-faced, as the 3rd Tank of C Squadron sinks to its mudguards in the French mire. In the last 48 hours, the regiment has lost 7 tanks, not to enemy fire, but to the terrain that the Royal Engineers swore was trafficable. Mercer is 34 years old, a metalworker from Sheffield, the steel heart of England. Before the king took a shilling, he spent his days welding heavy industrial girders and machinery in the foundries. He holds no degree in mechanical engineering from Cambridge or Oxford, nor has he attended the advanced courses at the Military College of Science. What he does possess is a lifetime of practical experience with heavy chains, metal tension, and weight distribution on unforgiving surfaces. The Bocage is a hell that no one at the War Office properly anticipated. If you want to discover how scavenged naval anchor chains altered the fate of hundreds of tanks in Normandy, please press that like button. It helps us share more forgotten technical histories like this one, and subscribe if you haven't already. The problem with the Bocage is not merely the mud. It is the diabolical combination of deep clay, ancient hedgerows sitting atop compacted earth banks 6 feet high, narrow sunken lanes choked with dense vegetation, and the incessant rain that turns every square yard into a trap for a 30-ton armored vehicle. The standard tracks of the Sherman V are roughly 16 inches, 42 centimeters, wide, fitted with standard steel links designed to support ground pressure on hard roads or dry fields. But the mud of the Bocage in June 1944 has a consistency that British Army technical manuals dryly describe as Class 4 deep mire, a category that essentially means impassable for vehicles with standard traction. The Germans know this, and they exploit it ruthlessly. They position their 75mm Pak 40 anti-tank guns and Panther tanks at the precise choke points where they know the Shermans will bog down. An immobile tank is a dead tank. In the 72 hours since the push inland began, the regiment has lost 14 Shermans, 11 of them destroyed while thrashing helplessly to free themselves from the muck. Mercer is scrutinizing the sunken tracks of the 3rd Sherman when he notices something critical. The track links are completely fouled, buried deep with no lateral grip, spinning in the clay like a conveyor belt running on grease. "We need more surface area," he says to Lieutenant Howard Jacobs, his troop leader. "The sappers already tried that, Sergeant," Jacobs replies, wiping rain from his face. "They tested track extensions. They snapped off after 200 yards. "I'm not talking about extensions, sir," Mercer says, his Sheffield accent thick. "I'm talking about changing the geometry of the contact point." Jacobs looks at him blankly. Mercer explains. When he worked in the heavy haulage yards back in the Midlands, they moved massive industrial boilers over sodden ground using heavy drag chains wrapped around the lorry wheels. The chains created teeth that bit laterally into the mud, distributing the weight and generating traction where smooth tires simply spun. "And what do you propose, Staff Sergeant?" Jacobs asks. "Naval anchor chains, sir," Mercer replies. "Welded perpendicular to the track links." Lieutenant Jacobs frowns at Mercer. That would violate approximately 15 regulations in the War Office Maintenance Manual. The tracks are balanced to exact specifications. You can't weld scrap metal to the links without authorization from Brigade HQ or the Ream Command. "With all due respect, sir," Mercer counters, "Brigade HQ isn't currently stuck in the mud with a panther pointing its muzzle at them." Jacobs considers this for 11 seconds. "Do it," he says finally. "But if the tracks snap and throw a link, the court-martial is for both of us." Mercer needs 3 things: naval anchor chain, heavy-duty welding kit, and 48 hours without active combat. The first part is surprisingly easy. Gold Beach, where the British landed, is just 8 miles to the north. It is littered with the debris of the Mulberry Harbor construction and abandoned naval refuse, including anchor chains from Liberty ships. Each link weighs nearly 18 pounds and measures a foot long. Mercer commandeers a Daimler Dingo scout car, drives to the beachhead, and acquires, in the finest tradition of the British Army, 40 yards of heavy anchor chain. No one asks questions. The logistical chaos following the invasion means a staff sergeant with an authoritative manner can walk away with almost anything. The welding equipment is trickier. The Light A detachment has a portable welding set, but the batteries are flat. Mercer improvises, rigging the Sherman's auxiliary generator directly to the arc welder using jumper cables stripped from a wrecked Bedford supply lorry. It isn't safe by any known electrical standard, but it sparks. Now comes the technical part. The Sherman tracks have 79 links per side. Mercer decides to weld segments of the anchor chain across the face of every third link, creating traction cleats that will extend 6 inches sideways and 4 inches downwards. The pattern is critical. If he welds the chains too close together, they will foul the road wheels when the track turns. If he welds them too far apart, they won't generate continuous traction. After scribbling calculations on the back of a tactical map, Mercer determines that a 1 in 3 pattern will provide 85% traction coverage while maintaining the mechanical flexibility of the track. He begins welding at 1400 hours on the 16th of June. The work is brutal. Each link of the anchor chain must be cut to size with an oxyacetylene torch, positioned exactly perpendicular to the track link, and welded with at least 3 inches of bead at every contact point to withstand the shear forces. Mercer welds for 6 hours straight. By 2000 hours, he has completed the left track of the Sherman. 26 segments of anchor chain, each fused with the precision of a master craftsman. The result looks brutally improvised, as if someone has glued saw teeth to a conveyor belt. But Mercer knows that aesthetics are irrelevant. What matters is the physics of contact. The modified track now has an effective contact width of nearly 26 inches, 16 inches of track, plus 10 inches of chain extension, an increase of roughly 60%. But more importantly, the rounded chains create penetration points that will dig into the clay at a perpendicular angle, generating the lateral resistance needed to prevent sliding. At 2300 hours, Mercer starts on the right track. He finishes at 5:30 on the 17th of June. He hasn't slept in 36 hours. His hands are scorched from welding sparks, but both tracks of the Sherman V are modified. 52 segments of naval anchor chain, over 13 feet of weld seam, and 80 pounds of added weight per side. Lieutenant Jacobs surveys the result. It looks like a mechanical nightmare, Sergeant. Sir, the best solutions usually do, Mercer replies, lighting a cigarette. At 7 o'clock hours, they run the test. The modified Sherman approaches the same sector of bog where 3 tanks had floundered 48 hours earlier. The driver, Corporal Brummy Reeves from Birmingham, drops it into second gear and hits the mire. Mercer watches the tracks. The anchor chain links bite. They sink for inches, then lock laterally. The chains act as perpendicular anchors, distributing the force sideways rather than just downwards. The mud cannot flow around the metal teeth, as it does with a flat standard pads. The Sherman pushes through. It doesn't bog. It doesn't spin. It simply tears through the Class 4 mud as if it were a damp country lane. Reeves kicks it up to third gear. The modified tracks keep biting. The tank crosses 50 yards of deep sludge in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The estimated time for standard tracks in these conditions? Based on previous data, impossible. It would have bogged in the first 20 feet. It works, Jacobs says, his voice controlled, hiding genuine astonishment. Mercer nods. Basic physics, sir. But the real test is when the shooting starts. June 18, 1944. The squadron receives orders to advance towards the outskirts of Tilly-sur-Seulles through 2 miles of bocage country under driving rain. It is exactly the sort of mission that has resulted in massive losses over the last fortnight. Mercer's Sherman leads the column. The first half-mile is paved road. At 10:20 hours, the column turns onto a sunken farm track between 7-foot hedgerows. The track is essentially a river of mud, 18 inches deep. The modified tracks bite hard. Mercer's Sherman plows through without reducing speed. Behind him, 5 Shermans with standard tracks begin to slide and lose momentum. 2 become bogged within the first 200 yards. At 11:05, the column reaches a crossroads where intelligence reported German positions. A hidden Pak-40 opens fire from 300 yards, striking the second Sherman in the column. The round glances off the sloped armor, but the Sherman slews violently to evade, and its standard tracks sink into the soft verge. The tank is immobilized. A sitting duck. Mercer orders his driver to advance. His Sherman, equipped with the modified tracks, maneuvers laterally onto the sodden field. The anchor chains dig into the soft earth, providing angular traction. The Sherman pivots 45 degrees, positioning itself for a flank shot. The gunner lays the 75 mm onto the target. First round. Direct hit. The Pak-40 nest disintegrates. Mercer's Sherman continues the advance. Over the next 2 hours, the column encounters for more German anti-tank positions. In each instance, the only tank capable of maneuvering effectively in the mud to engage them is Mercer's modified Sherman. Mission result: objective secured. High ground taken. 2 Shermans damaged but recovered. 0 Shermans destroyed. It is the first mission for the squadron without a fatal tank loss in 12 days. That night, the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, summons Mercer to his field HQ. Staff Sergeant, I am informed that you modified the tracks of your Sherman without authorization from the War Office. Yes, sir, Mercer replies, standing at attention. I am also informed that your tank was the only one capable of maneuvering under fire in Class 4 terrain. Yes, sir. Colonel Anderson looks at him for 8 seconds. I want those modified tracks on every Sherman in the regiment. You have 72 hours. Pick the welders you need. Requisition whatever materials are required. The quartermaster can complain to me later. Court-martial consideration suspended. Mercer begins that same night. Over the next 3 days, Mercer and a team of 6 ream mechanics work 18-hour shifts, modifying the tracks of 41 Shermans. They consume over 2,000 feet of naval anchor chain, 12 cylinders of welding gas, and burn out 3 auxiliary generators. By June 22, 1944, the entire regiment is equipped with the Mercer modification. The results are immediate and measurable. In the following 2 weeks of operations in the Bocage, the unit experiences a 73% reduction in bog tanks compared to the pre-modification period. The tanks can maneuver in terrain that was previously impassable. German ambushes that relied on immobilizing Shermans in the mud no longer work with the same lethality. Other regiments notice the difference. By the 5th of July, 4 additional armored regiments have adopted the Mercer modification. By the 20th of July, the modification has spread to 18 regiments operating across the British and Canadian sectors. The War Office, facing overwhelming empirical evidence, officially authorizes the modification on the 28th of July, 1944, under the designation Field Modification M4, Track Enhancement Anchor Pattern. But the true legacy appears in the casualty numbers. Post-war analysis by the British Army Operational Research Group, comparing tank losses in the Bocage, shows that regiments equipped with Mercer's modified tracks experience loss rates 41% lower than units with standard tracks operating in similar terrain during the same period. This translates to approximately 170 Shermans saved from destruction, and an estimated 680 tank crewmen who survived battles where they would otherwise have been destroyed while sitting immobile. The Mercer modification became standard practice for operations in soft ground. Refined versions were used in the Ardennes during the winter of 1944-45, in the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945, and were even adopted by American forces operating on the flanks. Walter Billy Mercer survived the war. He was mentioned in dispatches for exceptional technical innovation under combat conditions. After the armistice, he returned to Sheffield, where he opened a fabrication shop specializing in heavy plant machinery. He never spoke much about the war, but veterans of the Armored Corps who knew the history would occasionally turn up at his workshop just to shake the hand of the man who invented the tracks that saved their lives. Mercer died in 1989 at the age of 79. His obituary in the Sheffield Star mentions his military service in a single line. It does not mention the modified tracks. It does not mention the 170 tanks saved. It does not mention the 680 men who lived. All because a steelworker from Sheffield decided that the engineers were wrong about what was possible. Sometimes, the greatest military innovations do not come from research laboratories or advanced engineering committees. They come from a staff sergeant with practical experience in the steel mills, a portable welder, and the conviction that basic physics can solve problems that technical manuals declare impossible. The Mercer tracks demonstrated something fundamental about innovation in combat. You don't always need revolutionary designs or advanced technology. Sometimes you just need practical experience, available materials, and the willingness to ignore regulations when the survival of your mates is on the line. The French bocage in 1944 was one of the deadliest terrains the British Army ever faced. But thanks to a welder who understood weight distribution and lateral traction better than the boffins at the War Office, it became a terrain that British tanks could master. What do you think of this story of innovation under pressure? Did you know how a simple steelworker changed armored tactics in Normandy with naval anchor chains? Leave us a comment and tell us if you've heard of other field modifications that changed the course of a battle. Subscribe to the channel for more forgotten technical histories that altered military history. We rescue innovations that deserve to be remembered every week. Hit the